Nigeria also tried. In Nigeria, we have Igbo nationalism. In the late 1960s, they declared their independence from Nigeria, but after a kind of war, they they became part of Nigeria. Still, there are insurgencies there. India, many secessionist movements in India. Now, Ethiopia, the struggle for sovereignty in Ethiopia. So there are two competing forces: the center versus the nations. So the center has this ideology, creating, Hagara Mangist Gumbada, which started by Milik and then continued still until today. So Hagara Mangist Gumbada, I don't know the exact translation of this Hagara Mangist Gumbada, but I suspect it could be state-nation building or nation-state building or nation building, but whatever it is, almost the end goal is the same: creating Ethiopian state in which homogeneous people exist, speaking Amharic, professing what Professor Banti presented earlier, the same religion, the same culture, whatever. So, so regions, particularly, I'm saying, nations are there. There is no nation. I mean, Ethiopia is not a nation. Nations are there. Many nations are in Ethiopia, and they are fighting for nation statehood. So, in this fight between the center and nations, if we see the, the constitution of Ethiopia, nations are sovereign. If you read Article 8, popular sovereignty lies in the nations, nationalities, and peoples of Ethiopia. Said Article 39 talks about the unconditional right to secession. Even so, nations are powerful in Ethiopia in the constitution. Practically, no. Historically, nations were there, but the center is not such sovereign, because I'm saying Ethiopia is a failed state, because it has lost this, power, monopoly of violence, whatever, called basic definitions of state. Ethiopia does not fulfill that. So, but the federal constitution forges a kind of national identity, what we call Ethiopian national identity, kind of nation building. Uh, so if we can have historical aspect, the Latina nation building project was covered earlier. During the TPLF, we have authoritarian federal system, forging for a kind of national identity. And now we have a kind of Machiavellian Latin, kind of Semilonic character, a tricky person there. But the role here is there is a fight to establish state nation of Ethiopia. So when it comes to nations, nations are fighting to restore what they lost, precisely. It's not a new thing that they are creating. Oromo nationalism, for example, I'm not going to talk about this to OSA members. It is all about restoring lost sovereign power to the Oromo people. Briefly, according to the regional constitution of Ethiopia, Article 8 of the Oromia Constitution states that sovereign power in the region resides in the people of the Oromo nation, and the sovereignty of the people is exercised through their elected representatives and through direct democratic participation. Article 39 of the Oromia Constitution adds the Oromo people have unconditional right to self-determination, including the right to secession. This is written on the Constitution of Oromia, right? But practically nothing. It is colonial question, practically colonial question. Endorsed what my colleague Anand said. Now, PP is fighting for Ethiopian sovereignty. They restored the idea of agreements Gambada through Majamar. This Majamar is a kind of tricky political formula like A plus B plus C is equal to A. You know the end result. They, and the party is extremely centralized party, state merged together. No separation between the Ethiopian government and the party, no, because I have some experience in that. I know much about how it works, merge it together. The state is the party is the state. So there's one chairman, the boss, the prime minister, and one executive committee, one Congress, one headquarters. So regionals may have their own chapters or branches, and the center, the prime minister and the assigns regional coordinators, 5 persons to manage regional, political, and economic whatever affairs, security affairs. From the 5 coordinating committees at the regional level, one becomes the president of the region, the other becomes the secretary of the party at the regional, whatever. So, indirectly, regional presidents are assigned by the prime minister now, currently. And the transition from the EPRDF to the Prosperity Party, so if you see the Prosperity Party's program, Chapter 2, it says, building strong, legitimate, and sustainable Ethiopian nation state. That is the political program objective of Prosperity Party. I have this they presented a research when they established Prosperity Party. So the founding document of the Prosperity Party presented 5 justifications to abolish all what they call ethnic-related institutions and parties, to abolish everything that has a kind of association with ethnic institution. 5 justifications. Number 1 was the document accuses the EPRDF of promoting ethnic politics, undermining citizenship politics, it says. So, PP advances, PP advances citizenship politics, and Ethiopian people are a social basis. There's no Ethiopian people now. That's fake. And also, it says there is ethnic-based quota, no merit issue. This is also false. I mean, whatever the party system may be, ethnic-based quota is a must in Ethiopia. That's normal. And ethnic-based regional parties hindered assignment of officials from one region to the other, leading to the division of the country, it says. So, Amhara is going to rule Oromia, and an Oromia person is going to Tigray to rule, just what they suggested. And another is also, Amhara minorities were not accommodated by the previous EPRDF member parties and affiliate parties. Now they adopted Amharic as an additional official language to each region. So there is a move to constitutionalize this PP's project now. So they have presented, and we are on the verge of revising the constitution. The concluding question. Just these 2 questions. Given that the center continues to use extreme brutal forces against all demanders, given that the situation is authoritarian, extremely violent, would the center ever be willing to compromise and negotiate sovereignty in Ethiopia? If not, are nations left with exit option? Thank you.
The next presenter is Dr. Ibrahim. Please come to the Thank you for the opportunity. The title, as you can see, is the ambitious one. Do you know the bloodshed required to found this state? The trial and the execution of Lieutenant Mahmoud Muzammil, according to recently discovered Imperial Ethiopia secret court files. I won't be discussing the history of Maj'at Ulama because it's one of the best studied area in Oromo studies. So the question in the first half of the topic represents a critical interrogative inquiry in Imperial Ethiopia's police and the intelligence officers presented to Lieutenant Mahmoud Muzammil after a series of torture. Quote, "You immature child, do you know the bloodshed required to found this state?" Highlighting, unquote, highlighting the violence and bloodshed involved in the Ethiopian Empire's territorial conquests of the late 19th century, the subsequent military victories it achieved, and more importantly, the method of violence the Ethiopian Empire state mobilized to maintain itself. I now start the central section of my paper with a dramatic story of the execution Imperial Ethiopia had committed on the morning of Friday, November 13, 1917. On Friday morning, November 13, 1917, the Addis Ababa prison administrator, Colonel Brahane Weldeis, reported to Imperial Ethiopia's Minister of Justice in a top secret letter that he had hanged to death a prisoner named Mahmoud Muzammil on the same day at 10 a.m. local time. The Addis Ababa prison executed Lieutenant Mahmoud Muzammil, a former officer who served in the armed forces, based on the execution order it had received from the Minister of Justice, Akalawalt Habtawalt, 2 days earlier. That was November 11, 1917. The court archival records indicate that Lieutenant Mahmoud Muzammil first appeared before the Imperial High Court on February 9, 1967. The state prosecutor accused him of 5 counts of treasonable crimes, including, quote, bombing civilians watching a movie at Cinema Empire in the capital city Addis Ababa on November 21, 1966, attempted assassination of the Emperor Haile Selassie and his ministers, plotting to violently overthrow the imperial government, conspiring to dismember the Ethiopian society along ethnic lines, destroy the Ethiopian state known for its long history of national unity, and equally important, scheming to write an alternative history of Ethiopia, unquote. Imperial Ethiopia's High Court passed the verdict on Lieutenant Mahmoud on August 2, 1968, which Emperor Haile Selassie confirmed on November 1, 1917, rejecting Mahmoud's appeal. As the Imperial High Court passed a verdict on Mahmoud, the Amharic daily newspaper Addis Zaman broadcasted the following day a piece of news whose tone heralded a legal punishment of a bloody criminal. The Addis Ababa audience of the Amharic daily might have received the message the same way the imperial state designed it, but the trial and the execution of Lieutenant Mahmoud Muzammil was far from the punishment of a criminal per se. Although he was the only person executed after a formal imperial court trial, Lieutenant Mahmoud was, as many of you knew, was a defendant charged along with 8 other colleagues with varying criminal charges. The 9 defendants were founders and the key members of the Maj'at Ulama Association. As a snapshot, from the available historical sources, that is the Imperial Archive, the 1967-1970 trials of Mechat Ulama Association in Finfinne appear to represent an ordinary court proceeding charging criminals, which may seem to have no national political significance. But Imperial Ethiopia's secret court files and other records reveal a complex history behind tools and methods of state construction and the determined opposition the project encountered in Ethiopia. The history of the Mechat Ulama Association and its foundational role in the rise of Oromo nationalism constitutes one of the best studied subjects in Oromo studies. This paper does not intend to deal with the history of the Mechat Ulama Association. Neither does this paper intend to present a historical analysis of the imperial court proceeding of the Mechat Ulama Association. Instead, through the presentation of vital pieces of information about the trial and execution of a young military officer, Lieutenant Mambo Mazammer, the presentation attempts to highlight the intentions of the Ethiopian imperial states and charges against other key members of the association at two levels. One, the confrontations of Ethiopia's official nationalism and the rising modern Oromo political activism. Two, what the confrontation represents in the broader history of Africa. This paper or presentation, therefore, intends to present significant historical process that throws light on key features of one of Africa's oldest states, and a fascinating story of determined opposition the state project encountered from the rising Oromo political activism. By mobilizing Imperial Ethiopia's top secret court files, the paper approaches a complex and a turbulent history where Imperial Ethiopia's high-ranking military and civil servants previously loyal to the emperor and the Ethiopian state ally themselves with ordinary citizens challenging an African empire which had been heavily militarized, sophisticated, and armed with literary tradition. Why is the trial and execution of Mammo significant? The story of Lieutenant Mammo's trial and execution is significant historical development worthy of consideration because of two important reasons. One, it partly reveals how and why sophisticated and militarized African empire chose to pursue a violent path of state construction less recognized in the discussions of African history. Two, it sheds light on how thoughts and the practices of the Ethiopian state reinvented its loyalists and the co-ops as leaders of political career it dislikes the most, namely Oromo nationalism. Now, I quickly take you through the story of Mammo's arrest. First, Lieutenant Mammo Mazammer was arrested at 8:10 a.m. local time on November 22nd, 1966, along with his friend and housemate Tasfai Dagaga, close to a place called Sabah Dereja in Sijiskilo, Finfinne, while traveling to work. He was taken to the Serious Crime Investigation Unit of the Addis Ababa Police and was put in a solitary prison cell. The same day, he was taken to his residence at 12 p.m. local time for a house search that lasted for about an hour, and where the authorities claimed to have discovered 2 grenades and multiple documents the prosecutor subsequently used against Mammo at the Imperial High Court. He was brought back to the prison cell around 1:30 p.m. local time. The same day, at 8 p.m., Lieutenant Mammo was taken to an interrogation room where he was asked, quote, "Since you have a close relationship with Brigadier General Taddese Birru and the Jazmach Kabbede Bezunesh, we want you to tell us everything you knew regarding their attempted plot to assassinate the emperor and his ministers and the plan to overthrow the imperial regime violently before anything bad may happen to you. They, that is Taddese Birru and the Kabbede Bezunesh, won't benefit you after this," unquote. Mammo denied any knowledge of the interrogator's demand and was taken back to his prison cell. The following day, that was November 23rd, 1966, the interrogators provided Mammo with a pen and a plain paper and asked him to write down everything he knew about the same question he was asked the previous night. Mammo, in response, wrote a 10-page statement narrating about Mechat Ulama Association, how he became a member, how he knew Brigadier General Taddese Birru and the Jazmach Kabbede Bezunesh, how the association and its leadership came under government attack, and the method of Mechat Ulama's leadership responses, notably of Brigadier General Taddese Birru. Mammo was returned to the prison cell and brought back to the interrogation room on the night of the same day, that was November 23rd, where Imperial Ethiopia's senior government officials were awaiting him joining the interrogators. Among the present senior government officials were Deputy Minister of Interior Dejazmach Kifle Ergatu and Major General Derese Dubalo, Director of Public Security at the Ministry of Interior, and some more not particularly mentioned on the files. Here, the interrogators asked Mammo the same questions, now firmly saying, quote, "Tell us what you know," unquote. And Mammo replied, quote, "I already presented what I know in writing," unquote. Rejecting Mammo's position and rebuking him, one of the interrogators, whom Mammo did not remember by name at the time of his statement before the court, said, quote, "What you submitted in writing sounds like a joke. You know much more than you admitted. Now we will make you know it," unquote, threatening him with potential torture. At this point, Deputy Minister of Interior, the Jazmach Kifle Ergatu, instructed the interrogators, quote, "Go interrogate him very well," authorizing them to torture Mammo. Mammo was immediately returned to the prison cell. Such was how Imperial Ethiopia's authorities decided to expose Mammo to inhuman torture, rarely recorded in state repositories. I now present a summary of the nature of torture Mammo Mzemmer was exposed to according to records of the imperial state. And follow me with patience as much as you can. It's a summary, it's not word for word translation. So, about his torture, Mammo Mzemmer said he had experienced it at the hands of Imperial Ethiopia's interrogators. Mammo told the Imperial High Court on January 5, 1968, quote, and this was Mammo. "About an hour later, I was brought back to the cell the same night. Again, I was called for another interrogation. The time was 8 p.m. I was not given any meal or water all this time." That is from the time of his arrest the previous day. They said, quote, this is again Mammo, "We respected you till this moment as a fellow officer hoping that you would provide an authentic statement, but if you would not understand this, we will do on you what we do on thieves in our prison cells. One of the interrogators came in and said, "Why do you give him that much respect? Go interrogate him now." This time, some of them sought to take me for the torture, while some others tried to mediate, saying, quote, "Do not take him to the torture. He will tell us all of what he knew," and made me sit down. Immediately, Colonel Hailu, one of the interrogators, and His Excellency Major Dresser Dubale gave me a warning and a piece of advice, saying, quote, "Since many people arrested for committing similar crimes with yours are going to be pardoned, you will get the same privilege if you tell us the truth. Otherwise, various parts of your body might be hurt." I replied, I must say, "Why is it that you intend to beat me instead of trying me before the court of law?" While stalking my body, they advised me again, "You immature child, do you know the bloodshed required to found this state?" I responded, "I know nothing of what you seek me to admit." This time, they paraded in front of me many bodybuilder men in various clothes, calling them by their respective intimidating nicknames. The demonstration was intended to frighten and shock me to admit the allegations. Then they said, "As we want to give you one more chance before we hand you over to this man, now go back to your cell, rethink your position, and you will tell us the truth when we call you back in a moment." They returned me to the cell, called me back to the interrogation room, and smiling at me for the first time since they arrested me, they asked me that I must tell what I must tell them. I told them that I remain firm on my position. After this, they took me to a separate room where I would face various forms of beatings. I had my hands and legs tied. I was hung upside down and was beaten severely. They have beaten me severely and in multiple ways, so much so that blood dropped from my hands and feet. They bridled my mouth with clothes, since they had told me to raise my finger whenever I wanted to speak. I did so to get some relief from the torture. They loosened my hands and legs and returned me back to the interrogators. The interrogator sought me to speak, and I asked them back what they want me to say. They said, "You heard the first defendant, that is Brigadier General Taddese Birru, and the Judge Kabede Bizulash, ordering certain people to assassinate His Majesty on November 2, 1966, and that you threw grenades at Cinema Empire on November 19, 1966. We want you to admit and confirm this." I told them I never knew anything about these issues. They said, "You will never walk free until you admit. Don't you know how many people die in the type of interrogation you are in?" Then they made me remove my clothes, leaving me only in underwear, and locked me in a cave-like icy room. The roof of the room leaks icy drops of water. I felt the water drops on my head, like I had my head hit with stones. They took me out of the room the following morning at 10 a.m. and gave me scalding tea, beating me to gulp it down. Again, they asked me the same question, and they took me to the prison cell. Since I had nothing new to tell them, I spent the day in the cell. On the night of the same day, that's November 24, they have beaten me on my feet and exposed me to various forms of torture. I now raised my finger and they took me back to the interrogation room, but I did not tell them anything new. Such torture became a daily routine I live in. Ultimately, and bear this in mind, ultimately, they said they would inject a liquid made of a mixture of pepper powder and areca into my body through my orifices. Unable to bear the torture, I told them I would give them a confession statement with any content they would like. Then the interrogators wrote a statement in the way they liked, brought it to me, and told me to write it down in my handwriting, which I did. They typed it with a typing machine, informed me that 3 people would come to witness that I signed the statement as my own, and warned me that I would be back to experiencing the same torture if I refused to sign the document while the witnesses watched. They took me to the interrogator's office, and the 3 people came in immediately. The interrogators asked me to sign the document, and I refused and argued that this was not my statement, but I produced it under severe torture. They asked the 3 people to leave the office and wait outside. They took me to the interrogation room, threatened me with further torture, and gave me lots of advice. When I agreed to sign the document, they took me back to the office. The 3 witnesses came in again, and I signed the paper while they watched. Then they put me in a car, drove me to Cinema Empire, and asked me where I sat on November 19, 1966. Since it was true that I went to Cinema Empire to watch a film on the stated date, I showed them where I sat down, and the photographer took pictures. Then they brought me back to the prison cell. Afterwards, they wrote and presented another statement about allegations leveled against the first defendant and my alleged cooperation with him to make me sign it as a testimony against the former, and I vehemently refused. They turned it back, and I heard them saying, "We have enough information since we possess his handwriting narrating similar issues." After this, I was cared for properly, and and relatives were allowed to visit me at the prison compound. Just
دقيقة صديقني.
Now, the trial and the execution. All photos are from the Zebna results that you know very well. According to Imperial Ethiopia Secret Court files, the 9 leaders and some key members of Machat Ulama Association who were charged along with Mammo Mazember for treasonable crimes were this: Brigadier General Taddese Birru, the Territorial Army Deputy Chief; Mammo Mazember, an officer in the Armed Forces; Seifu Tasemma, banker; Gadi Faisa, farmer; Makonnin Wasanu, farmer; Lamesa Boru, soldier; Haile Mariam Gameda, lawyer; Colonel Alamu Kipesa, a retired army officer; Brigadier General Dawit Abdi, an officer in the Ground Force Engineering Department. The prosecutor charged the 9 defendants at the High Court on February 9, 1967. As the defendants pleaded with the court to open the proceeding to the public, but the prosecutor argued that the case was a sensitive national security matter, and the court decided in favor of the prosecutor, and the proceeding became in camera, so it became a closed session. Over the next 17 months, Ethiopia staged one of the most consequential trials of the 20th century, whose dynamic consequences would transform the country's political and military landscape in its modern history. Although these developments were less known to the public and less recognized in the broader scholarly community, while Imperial Ethiopia prosecutors charged the leadership and key members of the Medjat Ulama Association with 8 counts of crimes. Lieutenant Mamo was accused of the following treasonable crimes: plotting at Brigadier General Taddese Birru's residence on November 1, 1966, to assassinate the emperor and his ministers on the coronation of festival planned to take place on November 2, a charge he shared with Taddese Birru. Second, plotting between September 10 and November 22, 1966, to violently overthrow Emperor Haile Selassie. Again, a charge he shared with Taddese and Seyfu Tasamma. Third allegation, intending to instill divisions in the government through ethnic differences as a tool of a conspiratorial scheme that took place between October 15 and November 22, 1966, to illegally overthrow Imperial Ethiopia's constitutional order, a charge Mamo shared with Taddese Birru and Seyfu Tasamma. 4, inciting the Oromo people to hate the Imperial Ethiopian government and take up arms against the state, fundraising money to recruit bandits who would assassinate government authorities, encouraging the Oromo people to participate in planned armed rebellion, and planning to incite a civil war by organizing and participating in large gatherings and secret engagements in Medjat Ulama meetings at Taddese Birru's residence and the association's hall between September and November 1966, in Jaldu and Kachisi on May 27, 1966, in Gattiro, or a place called Kosi, on July 24, 1966, and in Era on October 15, 1966, charges he shared with all other defendants. 5, out of frustration caused by the failure of crimes, planned with Taddese Birru to assassinate the emperor and his ministers on November 2, he threw 2 grenades at citizens watching a film at Cinema Empire at 9 p.m. local time on November 19, 1966, and wounded 20 people, including children and old women. This was the exclusive charge. 6, possession of various illegal and unregistered weapons and ammunition called at a certain Abaji Far's residence on November 22, 1966, a charge Mamo shared with Taddese Birru, Seyfu Tasamma, Da'i Faisa, Lamesa Boru, and Mokannan Wasano. The imperial prosecutor presented several evidences, quote unquote, and oral information against Mamo Mazembe. The prosecutor's evidence include 81 witnesses of police and intelligence officers, spies, expert evidence, documentary records, and defendant's confession. Regarding the charges on Lieutenant Mamo Mazembe, the prosecutor used the defendant's confession statement produced under duress, intimidation, torture, and multiple forms of violence, which I read you out the way it was produced from the way Mamo presented to the court earlier. 24 of the 81 witnesses the prosecutor mobilized were used as evidence against Mamo, documents and weapons collected from his residence during the house search. Asked to present his defense after the court rejected his not guilty plea, Mamo initially counted 3 defense witnesses, but finally turned down the offer on January 26, 1968, saying, I quote, "I want the verdict." Ignoring Mamo's revelation about the torture he was exposed to and relying primarily on unsubstantial witness statements failing to prove the prosecutor's charges and rejecting the pardon the emperor offered to all defendants through the Ethiopian Orthodox Church Archbishop, the Imperial High Court, in its concluding statement of the trial, revealed its partiality, and the court went too far, defending the imperial state's position. How did the defendants respond? I will say a few words and finish about this. While denying major accusations of the prosecutor, the defendants, according to the files, did not hide that they held views that sharply contradict with imperial Ethiopian state's socio-economic, political, and historical perspectives. They did not hide that. In various public gatherings held in West Shah and RC provinces, they told their people that the development initiatives in Oromo inhabited areas were left far behind, illustrating their argument with insufficient schooling, health services, road network, and communication infrastructure. They were not heard publicly telling their people that underdevelopment was deliberate imperial government scheme, but the state prosecutor argued that it was fostered in their position because some of them, the leaders were key inner circle leaders of the imperial state. What emerges from this brief outline of accusations and responses in the Imperial Ethiopian High Court is deep contradictions inherent in the histories of Ethiopia. Although it rose with claims to enhance development, as we know very well, the Mechat Ulama Association was an expression of Oromo national consciousness that initially wanted to build itself slowly under the imperial state's wings. The imperial state responded with maximum brutality. On August 4, 1968, the Imperial High Court in Addis Ababa delivered its verdict. Sorry, the verdict is here. Brigadier General Taddese Birru and Mammo Mazemmer, death sentence. Seifu Tasamma, 10 years in prison. Dadi Faisa, 10 years in prison. Lamesa Boru, 5 years in prison. Mekonnen Wasanu, 7 years in prison. Haile Mariam Gammada died of torture before the verdict, and I won't go into that detail, but there are enough information on the files. Colonel Alamu Essa, 10 years in prison. Brigadier General Dawood Abdi was terminated from the army and 3 years in prison, but he died of disease and wounds he received in the jail. Brigadier General Taddese Birru and Mammo Mazemmer appealed the verdict to the Imperial Supreme Court, but the court confirmed the verdict on June 13, 1969. The case was finally brought to the emperor himself for a review and final decision. The emperor reduced Taddese Birru's punishment to life imprisonment and subsequently to banishment in Galamso, but confirmed Mammo Mazemmer's death sentence on November 1, 1970. The verdict of Imperial Ethiopian Court represents a national action against the earliest form of modern Oromo political activism. Despite the state's ruthless crackdown on the Mechat Ulama Association, the organization's impact did not end with the collapse of the association in the 1960s. The formal rise and fall of the organization became a cornerstone for the surge of Oromo nationalism. Its leaders and influential members, although loyalists of the imperial state at one time, became famous heroes of Oromo nationalism. The significance of the organization for Oromo nationalism is not converting the former loyalists of the imperial state to radical nationalists. That immediate and radical conversion did not happen, but the ruins of the organization served as a bridge in the transition to a clearly articulated national cause. The young members of the Mechat Ulama Association became founding members of the Oromo Liberation Front in 1973, 1976. I wish I could go into the details, of those files along with my own interpretation, but I am happy that the organizer, the leader of the panel allowed me to share at least the files. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tana. Thank you, the three presenter. The president allowed me to use extra time. It's not me who gave this extra time. So I apologize for the inconsistency in terms of sharing time. So now, if the term is yours, they are ready to answer any questions. The rule of the question is one person can ask two questions, very short, so that we can at least pass the questions to them. We have 15 minutes, unfortunately, unless the president gives that time. So please make the question short and also direct to the presenter for the question. And so that would be like managing the question in order to make the time effective. So, okay, let me see hand first. 31 August, 300, Professor Asafa Achisin, let's make four. Tafari? Okay, Professor?
My question why do you think that the Ethiopian empire determined to keep the base in the brightest of always? This is an example, of course. I read the time before presenting this excellent paper.
My question is, I speak from life experience. I speak about the Orthodox Church, which is one of the most individual I put it close to my mouth. And they are the second arch structure of colonial Ethiopian empire. Number one is the kingdom. That was destroyed in 1974. And now one left, the second arch enemy or land robbing institute is still standing. I just give you how rich they are, how many lands they took in brief. If you look, well, I can say that the richest, second richest in the world, next to the Catholic Church, this area, this is far. If you take from Joseph up to Aya, there are 5 churches. 4 of them have shops, banks, anything, offices. And Yekam has more than 30,000 residents. I'm just giving you one example. And then let's go to the place where I was born, 50 kilometers from Addis. In total, Lago certificate. They put a pillar of concrete, a metal cross, and there is a pencil line. Next to it is we can make it. Next to that is upward. And then there is a plan, Suluta, where there is houses, long. There is another empty space, fencing. And then when you go out from Suluta, just a few kilometers, there is a Mikhail pillar, that says Mikhail fencing pillar. And then before I reach to my farm, there's a place, there is Boo Boo, and there is a Aval. There also they have they did the same thing, pillar and cross. The funniest thing happened when I arrived where I was born. My elder brother told me, his name is Lamma. kan abbaan keenya suni eessonni dhufanii fudhatanii kenninee fi burqaasanis waraabbachuu hin dandeenyu. Qabala dubartiin keenya daawwattuu bu'anii fagoo deemanii bishaan waraabu. Mikaa'ela akka nu dhaaban taabota akka nu dhaaban gaafachaa jira. Maal argina? I was just frozen.
Nu gabaabsaa yeroo ni jiru.
Isinan gabaabsa. Jarri kun caantotti intala barraa sirgamissee jedhan takka awwaala qabu. She was 3 days. Her body was namni si wanni ta'e warra si Yoosefitti dhaqaniitu awwaala. Hin awwaalamtu maaliif qubee barsiifti jedhanii. Amboo deemni bu'aa deemniti ambootti taphatu ta'e. Hin seennu maaliif qubee kana duraan dhaabaa. Isa bichaa miti bakka baay'eetti taabonni taphanni asirra jedhanii fudhatan. Maal jechuun barbaade? Ortodoksii Churchiin kun jireenya lafa nu saama. Du'aanis lafa nu saaman. Sardiin maaliif du'aanis akka lafa nu saamanii amma Finfinnee keessatti bakkeen awwaalaa hin jiru. Eessatti awwaala? Riiferaal Finfinnee. Hoolota Dukom laga Caafoo Sulultaatti awwaala. Ammas hoo du'anis lafa nurraa saaman. Hoo jiraatanis lafa nurraa saaman. Bakka awwaalaas nu dhoowwatan. Maal kan Jomo Kenyatta beektuu miti waan inni jedhee. When missionaries come, we have the land, they have the Bible. They told us to pray, to close our eyes. When we pray and open our eyes, the land is gone, and we have the Bible. Oromoon akkanatti lafa dhabaa jira.
Galatoomaa isaan bukkee kennan. Babal'isinis nu gabaabsaa.
This is more of a comment than a question. For Dr. Shana, regarding Lieutenant Mammo Madam. The first detailed story about Mammo Madam, I think was narrated on pamphlet named Oromia back on September 11th, 1976. The first issue of Oromia publication had a special note on the life and death of Mammo Madam. And it is kind of a detailed, very well researched announcement. There are two outstanding things I still remember after so many years. One of them is when the verdict was handed to him, he said, በዚህ ችሎት የፈረዳችሁብኝን ፍርድ የኦሮሞ ልጆች በብርሃን ያነቡ። What you pass as the verdict in a secret court today will be public one day, and our children will read it in public. When we did it in 1926, and you helped us remember it today. And the other thing was when he was hanged. By the way, according to the information on the pamphlet, Oromia #1, the person who hung him, his name is Asiralaka Tola Kaba, an Oromo king hanged another Oromo, because that is one of the methods us against us. When he was asked, he was given an opportunity to speak, and he said, "My blood, which is split today, will not be in vain. This blood will one day wash away the debt from the Oromo or the nation and from Oromo land." These are the two outstanding comments that he made, and I just want to the rest to remember this as part of story of sorry.
Haye Galatoma Dagama. Yeah, okay. My question goes to Dr. Milkesa and Dr. Tana. My first question is for Dr. Milkesa. Dr. Milkesa, according to you, how is nationalism in Ethiopia now? You mentioned about nationalism in Europe, and you say that it is growing, rising, but what about in Ethiopia? And again, when you evaluate Oromo nationalism, where is it now? Some people argue that it is aging. Is that true? For Dr. Itana, thank you. Really, it is very interesting presentation. 8 or 9 years ago, I talked to Mamo Mazamir Sad, and he told me that his persecution is not only related to Majat Ulama, but his genealogy. He told me that his father was also executed and his grandfather also executed. Do you have information about that? Have you come across any information about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me see other hands. Okay, we'll go to the next round. Let's try this one, and I see a lot of hands. So we'll come to second round. Please use the same rules and make it short so that we'll have a chance to receive more questions. Dr. Gekeru, any questions that you can start? Why you
see, as I mentioned earlier, the Orthodox Church and the political wing and the religious wing were very much intertwined. They were part of the exceptionalism which I mentioned earlier. And in the context of that Amara exceptionalism, any territorial expansion and the taking of the property of or the resources of the victims is considered a holy war in quotation. I'm calling Postego, who also uses I think Sarah Mazagora, who wrote the great tradition. The tradition that they had built to dispossess, to conquer, and then dominate the rest of the people in that area. But coming to the land issue, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had a free hand to take any land, anywhere on its own, because it's just the wing of the state. I tried to compare that with the conditions or situations in colonial Africa. In colonial Africa, colonial powers didn't take land and give it to the church. Rather, the churches, the Christian missionaries, negotiated with the chiefs. They negotiated with the chiefs. In fact, the chief, many chiefs were willing to give land, to assign plots of land to missionaries to build a church over there. So, quite a contrast. In this case, there was no bound at all. There was no limit at all that was imposed on the Orthodox missionaries or Christian bishops to take the land. But in the case of Africa, it was really the chiefs that who gave them the land. And most times, in almost all cases, The missionaries bought land from the chiefs too. They bought land where they built the church. In the case of Ethiopia, it was in this village, that's very, very important. That's very important. Economy, which includes land use, without any restriction. That's exactly what they are doing today. In Shanghai City, they find open spaces and then they plant church and so on. The story is too long, but the very fact that the church and the state work together gave free hand to the church to get our land.
Galatomi, Gavi, Keyon, Batera Tae. Is the Oromo nationalism 80? No, as far as I know, the Oromo nationalism is rather flourishing and I think it is on the verge of restoring sovereignty to the people of the Oromo. Now, currently, Oromia is not in the hand of the PP, Prosperity Party's government. It looks that, Oromo nationalism is accomplishing, its mission, vision, as far as I know, and I don't go to the detail of explaining how nationalism is going on in Europe or everywhere. But I know we are on the verge of achieving what we lost. Thank you.
Thank you. Tana, Professor Asafat, in the first question. Very briefly.
Thank you. Kasmat Nasa. Professor Asafat, thank you for the question. Because Ethiopia always wants Oromos best in the values. Nagama? Ethiopia always wants Oromos best and the brightest to be punished and to be assassinated. That's a fact. Until the present time, and lots of facts testify to that. Because in my view, that is the way to undermine, discourage, and finally defeat the national cause of Oromo. Because killing the best and the brightest would discourage the needy, and punishing them alive, like it happened to many patriots along the line, would discourage many other people. I believe it is a methodology of scheming to defeat Oromo nationalism. Obboleessi kun gafachi waa'ee maammoon jedhee soorsii tokko kaaftee natti maqaa keessanii. Thank you very much for pointing to some of the sources, especially Oromia magazine. I am aware of methodological difficulties of reading and working with imperial archives, and these are alternatives, oral sources, and such magazines and other sources that are beyond the control of the state are alternatives to overcome these methodological limitations. But if I heard you properly, you say the first one was published in September 1970?
September 11th, 1976.
1976, okay, that's right. Thank you very much. I'll continue to look for those files. This is early stage research, but at the moment, like you can see from the topic, I'm approaching the topic initially through the eyes of the imperial state, according to the records that the empire left behind in secret, in closed doors, what they recorded. For example, what Mambo said to the Pope, they said and recorded. So thank you very much for pointing to them. Tafari, do I have information about execution of Mammo's? That I don't. But it is something to look into. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, let's go for another round. DJ.
try to balance both sides. Professor Mohammed, Yared? Okay, I think, can I have 2 more hands, President?
Yes, please.
Sorry. 2 more hands? Okay. Okay. Very briefly, please, maximum 1 minute. Let's have, okay, DJ, please.
Yeah, my question is to Professor Banti. These OSA aids, they carry around these crosses, and the rest of the Orthodox churches, like in Eastern Europe or even the Egyptian Orthodox, the priests don't carry these muskets. Is it an intimidating tool in Ethiopia to the Roman parents, or what's the essence of carrying that? The rest of the Orthodox churches haven't seen, maybe in Russia, but not Europe. And also, are you aware of this Oromo guy in the 1920s? And this book called the Haynya Zaman Mabacha. There's an Oromo guy who went to their school, was brilliant, he had everything. And then after a while he said, and then he got that. They poisoned them and killed them. This book, in that book called the Haynya Zaman Mabacha. Are you aware of it? Thank you.
Mine is very short. Ritana, there is plenty. Oh, thank you. Dr. Ritana, I think there is plenty of material. You plan to develop it into a book, plenty, really, the area you have covered.
Got it? Got it.
So, you got here we go. My question is to Dr. Mukesha, and it's regarding the sovereignty of Oromos and vis-a-vis the Ethiopian state. So the Ethiopian state sovereignty came about as a result of Oromos sovereignty was lost because the Oromo elite betrayed the Oromo people. Right? In addition,
Please. Sagale ke naga. Barka iti?
Okay, quick question. So one is the Oromo sovereignty from your perspective. What's the basis for it? Like, is there, as the Oromos are claiming a new identity, are we claiming a new nation? Or have we existed since the 16th century at least as a nation, and we have lost it because of the will of one man? Second one is sovereignty the ultimate goal, or is it a penance? Like, are we looking for are we mobilizing the Oromo nation, the Oromo people to capture the Ethiopian state power, or is our Oromo nation itself an end? It's like pure politics, or it's just an instrument, like to mobilize people so that the Oromo nation can take power.
Galatoma afaan Oromoon hin gaafadha. Profeesar Geetahuun hin gaafachuu barbaada. Waa'ee amantii irratti tokko yeroo jalqabaa sana yeroo ilaaltu iddoo tokkotti kanan dubbise amma kootii gochuu hin danda'u. Sababa yeroo kiristiyaana taatu maqaa kiristinnaa sii baasanii fi yeroo islaama taatu garuu rikwaayimentii sun kan hin jirree fi akka diddaatti Oromoon islaamummaa baay'ee fudhate kan jedhu jira. Sarratti koomentii gochuu barbaadde. Lammaffaan immoo decolonizing religion isa jedhu kana waan amma keessa jiru assasiin goota maanni qabsoo amma deemaa jiru deemsa keessa jirru hundumti keenya amantiin akkam nu gochaa jira. Akka nuyi itti si oofnu nu gochaa jira moo akka nuyi duukaatti harkifannu nu gochaa jira. Hiikaan isaa immoo maal ta'uu qaba jettee yaadda kan jedhudha. Fayyaa ta'e.
Okay. So my question is a very simple one. It's directed at Dr. Tana Abte. So why do you think the imperial government zeroed in on Lieutenant Mamu Mazember for execution? There were personalities with higher stature in the co-accused, and he was the only one who was executed, to my understanding. Why do you think they focused and zeroed in on Lieutenant Mamu Mazember?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. This question is aimed at Itana Hapte. So my question is really very direct. Since you are planning to expand your research and publish it in some form, I wanted to ask you, did you, like in the archival research, in the archival documents or records, did you find any intent that, I mean, like it's significant that Mama was targeted, but from the archival research, did you find authorities at that time stating, like, you know, that to target the whole or the parts of the Oromo population? And I, you know, the details are very interesting, the continuity is very interesting, but I just wanted to know if you found any intents that extend beyond Mambo Mazember to the larger Oromo public. Thank you.
The last one for the
Nagama. Telatoma Gatingo, Mali, Rada Kabea, Vesilase, Amma Mati, Sedimo Duma Amma, Oromo, Tesma, Oromo, Targeti Kolati, Oromo Dati, Kahine, Beku, Mali Puli, Mali Puli, Yakin Kanawa, Timo, Kandemo. Namooti biskut amma yuwaya wansi waya Oromo seri Oromo kan wajib made wansi waya amma wan waya is waya mana kita tahu Oromo da waya kujira kita komedi ko tan pada kamera mo pangkat dapat Mali di beka Oromo di ya tu kan itu nanti beka Oromo di jadi Oromo kafi kan kafi dan jauh kan sebenarnya di berbaju dan jauh antara hak dan boleh kan dulu beka jadi kan itu beka jadi kan itu mana kan mau kerja di mana berapa ini kan yang sadar mau gini mau sadar mau gini oke
All right, I don't think you have much time. You see, the purpose of my presentation is topic is really to encourage conversation. Given the timeliness of the movement, I just want to encourage conversation among the Oromos, and also I truly believe that it is a missing link in the Oromo nationalist movement, something we have missed so far. So if now completing the movement, I'm sure the goal will be achieved very, very soon. It's not a well thought of and then not a detailed research. I just wanted to encourage you to start discussion. So I DJ is get the Mandala Academy, we look at I don't know why they brandished maybe it was because that's what we say. I think the other book, you mentioned, my board elder will answer that for the Columbia, yes, came to Oromo names. In fact, I have the details here. About 2 years or 3 years ago, when Balaima community started, Balaima community started the movement, there was a talk among the Orthodox leadership. And I think it's Abu Abraham, who's the manager of the Ethiopian Patriarchate. He said, Abba Asabulo Simen level. That he was asked, Maliman Angidrama, Maliman Abu Abba Asabulo Simen level. Abu level. So that's exactly for them. It was a long-standing policy strategy. And out for the decolonizing the region, really it is a concept that I have not yet developed. It's just a working concept, here, but I need to clearly define what I mean by this. So that's a work in progress.
I think the first question, I suspect, is a historical question, whether the Oromo were nation or not. Your argument, in my knowledge, we're not going to create new things, we're restoring. That's my belief, that's what I read, that's what I know. The Oromo is fighting to restore what is lost. For me, sovereignty. Sovereignty conceptually is about, where the power emanates. Democratically speaking, power belongs to the people, the Oromo nation. So the Oromo need to have that lost, that power, what they lost due to the conquest, subjugation, colonialism, whatever name it may be. So the introduction of the Ethiopian Empire State led to, the loss of this sovereign power for the people of the Oromo, the nation. And the ultimate goal of, Oromo nationalism, to my knowledge, is also, I don't know whether we are fighting to establish Ethiopian sovereignty, because Ethiopia as a state was introduced as an antithetical to Oromo nation and national sovereignty. So the two are, for me, the opposite to each other. So they are at war now, and the Oromo nationalism is fighting to restore what I said earlier, to restore. And whether they want to create African Federation or not, whatever, confederation or stable, I don't know much about that, but the Oromo are at war to restore what is lost to the Ethiopian state.
Okay, I'll be brief. Professor Mohammed, thank you very much for the feedback and the comment that this can make a book, and there are plenty of materials out there. I have many other historians at my side. Thank you very much. Of course, this is part of a book project I crafted, which is for 4 years. So we will be working on this together over the coming few years. Why was Mahmoud the only executed person when there were many who were charged by the imperial state? The sources I have exposure to are all silent about this, including the imperial state. The reporters did not say a word about why Mahmoud was the only person the emperor wanted to execute. For example, by reducing the punishment of the Brigadier General at this But my imagination is that the emperor did not want to leave the rising consciousness unpunished. He wanted to punish it in some way. He wanted to attack it in some way, but not by at the level of high-profile politicians and military elites, maybe. But of course, like we have seen, most of them died anyway from the wounds they received in prison, and Tigers himself was executed by the administration. So this is things to continue to study and think about. Did you find the intent to target the entire Oromo people beyond Mamo and Mechatulum as leaders? Absolutely. And the narratives of the imperial state and the court recorders are full of the intentions. If I tell you some of the stories, you will be deeply disappointed, especially what happened in Era, during the meeting of Era, where Tardessa himself was the spokesperson. What the governor and police officers did to Tardessa and the broader Oromo community, what they said and what they did to the entire party. The allegations themselves, if you look at them one by one, although only 9 people were charged in court, they targeted the entire people. Those which were fabricated, as well as those which were actually something that the leaders attempted, target the entire Oromo people, and particularly the rising consciousness of the time. But the problem is the record needs reading between lines and very, very great care, because there are lots of methodological limits when you deal with imperial archives. There are ideas silenced even in the secret archives. There are ideas excluded. For example, the author of Gazettelname said imperial authorities came to witness when Mamo was hanged, but the archives were silent. Only one person from the Ministry of Justice were sent, called Mamo out, and told him the decision that he was going to be hanged the same morning. It did not quote a senior authority sitting down when Mamo was hanged in Kallenberg prison in SRR. So that was the case, and I will continue to look into this very carefully. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Now, please give me a welcome to the
Thank you very much, Dr. Kabedi. Thank you very much, the panelists, and this is really an inspiring panel. Now we proceed to the next panel, and the topic of the next panel is assertion of sovereignty in the face of violence. To moderate this panel, I would like to invite Robera Tassa to come to the podium and invite the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, so we had 3 panelists. Unfortunately, Obozaran couldn't make it today. We saw Fikar Haider yesterday. Fikar, are you here today? You're here. I'd like to introduce you. But I couldn't see her, so I don't think she's here. So it would be just Professor Daniel presenting today. Just give us a moment to set up here. Okay, all right, so we're ready for our presentation. I'll introduce Professor Daniel Ayana. Professor Daniel Ayana is a long-time member of Oromo Studies Association and regularly presents on issues pertaining to Oromo studies. Professor Daniel Ayana is a professor of history in the department at Youngstown State University and a former lecturer at Addis Ababa University. He received his PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Currently, he's a professor and director of graduate studies, and he has published in the Journal of Asian and African Studies, the Journal of History in Africa, and the Journal of Oromo Studies. Dr. Ayana's latest article is on how the West and Ethiopian scholars fabricated a falsehood about the term Habesha for 5 centuries and quietly dropped the term. His current presentation is going to be on the contradiction between civic freedom and sovereignty freedom. Which way Ethiopia? So I present Professor Daniel Ayana to the stage. Thank you.
You too. Just a background. Professor Orlando Patterson, an African descent from Jamaica, researched for about 8 years on slavery, especially in the West. And his initial interest was why slavery was so the backbone in the economy, but he ended up finding that the democracy in the West was essentially the test, the experience in slavery that led to democracy, that led to freedom. For 8 years he researched, and then when we published his work, the Cold War ended and the book was widely discussed in college campuses. And so by chance I attended one of these, and the issue that was raised at that session were 2. One was about Africa, and the sources he used for Africa were very limited. He used some Western sources on slavery, and that was one of the limitations that was raised. The second was the concepts that he did not include, the institutions that he did not include in Africa, because in the West, there are some institutions that became the basis for democracy. And so in this book, his presentation is the part that I'm going to introduce today, is the contradiction between civic freedom versus sovereign freedom. Actually, Dr. Mepesa and partly Dr. Trenti, and to some extent the presentation of Dr. Tanahate are a background to what I present by accident. So there are 2 points that I would like to start with. The first was why did the Oromo emphasize the God And the simple question is they experienced slavery from the Egyptian Old Kingdom, New Kingdom, and late kingdom. And that is an experience that put them on this path. Lately, Egyptologists and scholars and Nubian studies have clearly connected the Oromo in that area. The second was partly raised here, why do Abyssinians, I use the word Abyssinia in quote because it is a convenient inaccuracy, a term used as a convenient inaccuracy. Why do they oppose the idea of freedom or equality? Because in the West, the whites support equality for blacks. So these are the questions that some of the young generation raise. And even today, there are these questions being raised. So the simple answer to this is that the basic issue is this. Dr. Banti introduced the idea of chosen race, the chosen race. Most people actually disregard this word, this term. Behind this term lies one thing, that is what is called limited literacy or restricted literacy. Yeroo haasaa haasofnu oduu fakkaata. Yeroo barreeffamee namni namaa dubbisu immoo waan dhugaa fakkaata. So limited literacy starts very early in our area. It is with this limited literacy that the idea of chosen race, the chosen people, was instilled for almost 900 years. For almost 900 years. And therefore, from this notion of limited literacy, what the Abyssinians want is civic freedom? No. What they want is sovereign freedom. Sovereign freedom. In the West, freedom was generated from experience of slavery. And one of the lessons, discoveries from this scholar is that women played important role in the Western invasion of freedom from the very beginning. And even during the Enlightenment era, women played a critical role to provide a forum for scholars to discuss these ideas in their own residence in Europe. These scholars sat in the villas of the wealthy women and they debated with each other. No place was available for them to discuss this idea of freedom in order to connect back to the time of the Greek and the Romans. The Black civil rights itself is a spillover from this original idea. In the US, the persistence of slavery also pushed the idea of white male freedom. In non-Western areas, there is this notion of stillbirth freedom. But this notion is not so much well studied. So, for instance, no reference to Botswana, no reference to Senegal in this study by Orlando Patterson. One archaeologist from East Africa presented at the session I earlier mentioned about the Gada, and then another scholar stands and says, oh, don't bother about Ethiopia. It is African history presented as Middle Eastern history or Middle Eastern history presented as African history. it was a veiled reference to my own professor there at the time. And so that is the problem. And so the GADA essentially is the institutionalization and idealization of freedom as a central value, which was connected to the Greeks and then later the Romans. By the way, for the Greeks and the Romans, for the Greeks, out of about 400,000, 500,000, it is only about 31,000 men only born from citizen mother and citizen father who were citizens. So you can actually compare this to what was happening, to compare to what was. So to move forward, Gada democracy is essentially rooted in the contact with ancient Egypt, and one of the points that Orlando Patterson presents was that there was no organized politics in there is no organized politics, there is no participative politics in Africa. That's how he presented it. However, in the case of the Gada system, you have the organized politics or the Gogesa. And one point that this scholar presented was that once states were presented, organized in Africa, the adult male participative politics had ended. And that's how he presented. In the Gada system, the unique arrangement of property inheritance flattens the concentration of primeval accumulation. And so we have what we call primo campus primogeniture, which is contrary to Patterson. And there was civic participation, organized politics within the care of the Oromo. Now, what is sovereign freedom? Here is the issue where Dr. Mutesa already presented as a background. What the Oromo, the Walaita, and the others want is a civic freedom. If you listen carefully on some of the speeches made in these days by the Torah Abyssinians, it has a subtext. The subtext is, we don't need you. We have a sovereign freedom. We act on our sovereign freedom. You are not our equal. We don't sit with you to discuss about Ethiopia. That's what the subtext is. Because sovereign freedom is the power to act as one wishes, regardless of the wishes of the others. Most humans desire to control not only their own life, but also the lives of others. Philosophers dismiss this from the domain of freedom, but here lies the root of slavery. Here lies the root of authoritarianism, monarchy, totalitarianism, and various forms of political rule. So, civic freedom is the capacity of adult members of a community to participate in its life and government. Participative politics in institutionalized form enables essentially the society to coexist. So the US and the French revolutions introduced sovereign freedom, or popular sovereignty. It is when you have the civic freedom, then the state you live in, based in whatever form, organized, exercises sovereign freedom. No, popular sovereignty, sorry. So it is at this level of contradiction that we are now, this level of contradiction. Some groups want civic freedom, others want sovereign freedom. They demand sovereign freedom. They say they are entitled to sovereign freedom because they formed the state, because they are the chosen race. And you have, no, don't talk to us. We talk to you. We talk to you. We tell you what you will do. That is the approach. And so when Dr. Mutesa says Hagar Mangist, that is what is being planned to modernize, to establish, to be reconfigured. During the Marxist days, one of the biggest debate was unity or equality. Unity or the first thing that comes is unity. The first thing that comes is unity. Why? Because it was uniformity what they are saying when they are saying unity. It is not equality what they are saying. That's at one level. The other level is colonial Africa did not choose to be colonized. Although they were colonized, they did not reject Western democracy. The problem was they wanted wholesale adoption. They wanted to simply replant. They did not go to the roots of their own institutions to establish democracy. That was their problem. That was their problem. Come to Ethiopia, the problem is we bypass capitalism, we go to socialism. What they were bypassing was not actually capitalism. They were bypassing this issue of multiple cultural groups who are there. Because if you take the route through Western democracy, then there is going to be nationality questions. We don't need this. You just bypass this and then you arrange the question. The nationality question will be solved by socialism during the era of socialism, when we enter the era of socialism. So that was one of the issues that we find in Ethiopia. So pre and post 1974 revolution, from monarchy to Marxism, it is sovereign individuals who were ruling. One definition, Amara means free people. This was a definition invented, I think, very recently, probably in the 20th century. The opposite of this is the word Sarah. In Old Amharic, essentially narrate this, and this narration will be repeated, and then once it is repeated over and over, it becomes true. But Tariq and history, these are contingent truths. That is the rule. So to bring back to conclusion, civic freedom is when you have essentially people having freedom and then collectively come together and make their own decision to form states. Sovereign freedom is when groups of individuals or an emperor or a dictator rule, dictate upon the others. These are two contradictory rights. So here there is currently mentioned, installed or embedded or at the crossroad of these two contradictory political ideas. Thank you.
Okay, so feel free to just point to questions and I'll take the mic there.
Can you hear me? Actually, I don't have a question for Dr. Daniel, but I would like to make a comment. Your presentation is relevant to countries where they have sovereignty, like they have the United States, or any other countries who have democracy and they have their own rules and govern themselves. That doesn't apply to the Oromo case. But you have mentioned Ethiopia in several forms about the kingdom, about the Solomon decline, about jumping to Marxism from kingdoms. So that is all the problems that came to the current issues. That's what I understood. The fact is, Ethiopia is an imperial state that is built on a pack of lies. The name itself, Ethiopia, is borrowed from a lie, from Kush, because the Greeks mentioned it in a written form. They took that because of the Napata and Marawi civilization of the Kush. They were trying to relate themselves to that, but the Abyssinians are not related to that. What is happened in Ethiopia is the first is Theodros who started the expansion and the colonization forms by throwing the Yadu kingdom, which were in Gondar. Theodros himself is of Tigrayan origin by his father, even though his mother is Kemal. But the Amaras make him as their heroes. Then Johannes came to power. If you guys remember, at Boromeda, Menelik and Teklehaimanot, he blessed them to go and colonize the Oromos. So if he didn't die, Johannes could have been Menelik. They are of the same stocks to oppress the Oromos. The funny thing currently is the creator of Ethiopia, the father and mother of the colonial state of Ethiopia, are Tigrayans and Amaras. But they are the ones who are ending Ethiopia. They are the ones who are destroying it now. It's a very unique. Everything about that place is incredibly unique. Empires normally, they run away from the colonized people, but they stay in their core states. But the Tigrayans want to have their own sovereignty. The Amaras are currently also wanting their own state. So, because they don't have a place, their center is in Oromia. They don't have a place to run into, other than their village where they are from. So it is a self-destructing state which is helping the Oromo, which is good. We like it and we pray that they destroy themselves in Ethiopia.
Professor Daniel, would you like to comment on that or move to the next question?
Actually, one of the comments I would like to make here is the limited literacy that created the idea of rival legitimacy for the two groups has gone into multiple layers of contradictions, that is currently pitting three different groups together: the Eritreans, the TPLF, and the PP ruling from Finland. These, at the root, is what was written by limited literacy, restricted literacy, and justified lecto-oral. And now it is in these contradictions that you find these self-destructive activities going on. And so if you look at the subtext of a debate between an Amara PP and an Oromo PP, the Oromo PP thinks that he is equally and he is entitled to talk to the other. The other is subtle way, in a very subtle way, that no, you are not. No, you are not. I don't want you. I can rule. That's what the subtext is, that's it. And so for the Oromo PP, they don't go deep there and sort of see this. And so there you have it. And so one of the points you mentioned about resource is, accidentally I found out a document that was first drafted by the British for the Eritreans to, for the Greater Tigrayan design or project. And what that professor writes is, you need a resource. And though he brings down the boundary down to Lake Ashenge, and Lake Ashenge was renamed Aloha Intergreen. And he basically mentioned resources very important. But again, the issue of limited literacy created another problem: Hamasan and Aksum rivalry. Hamasan and Aksum rivalry. Italian colonialism comes, and then the rivalry becomes completely two different states. Hamas and Eritrea to have a separate state. And so you have this issue. So at the root lies the limited literacy or restricted literacy or lecto-oral or tarif.
There's one question from Gary.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Ayana. I don't know if you read journal, but Haberman says Gada is a too different concept. It was not invented by the Romans. You can comment on that.
Yeah, actually, I discussed this issue with someone earlier at some stage. What Haberman said was Gada and the Oromo could not have invented this. They must have borrowed this. And then, actually, what he did was, what I later discovered, what he did was, there is this concept of Ilmawa Abuddha. So that concept had gone into Arabic, and the Arab Arabic translation goes into French, and then I found it in French. And what he did was, instead of translating the Arabic into from the Arabic or from French into English, he went into Swahili or another language in East Africa, and then brought it into his book. And then he said, with this word, they seem to claim that the elected Gada leader is called Ilmawaka Buddha. And it is false. Actually, he was simply completely misrepresenting the fact. And he was doing that in order to carry the favor of the ecology of Ethiopian studies, which does not want to present in good light. By the way, as Maron Blakese always talks that whenever he presents about Gada, the comment is, you put them up there, you put them up there, you put them up there. And Ethiopian studies ecology presents Gada system only as age grade. And that age grade basically brings along the nilotic age grade system, and it was a deliberate way of downgrading. Yeah. Understand?
Gafinko, my question is on the Tariq and Tariq. Amazingly, last night I heard this story, and the story says when you tell a theory, when you disseminate a theory, and the population, the popular would take it, and it becomes a reality, because they don't distinguish between what is true, what is conceptual, and what is reality. So my question is, this what you call ora lecto ora, and I'm really interested what the lecto ora or ora lecto has played on our psyche, because many of the Oromo who subscribe to the Ethiopianist idea or ideology are based on this tarikh, on this lecto ora. So how do we take it away? How do we eliminate it? How do we, zap it out from our minds, if you will?
Actually, already the contradiction we are in is because we have passed the time of limited literacy. We have reached the era of what you might call it Western literacy, when people start to read and write, and then what is written can actually be challenged as what you can talk about on equal level. And so that's where we are now. Everybody can read and write. So electoral time has passed. And so, yes, it had really a serious impact, and people had believed in that. And not only us, the West believed in the concept of Habesha, and then they propagated for 500 years. And suddenly they realized it was false. And then they finally dropped it.
Two more questions.
Bringing us something thought-provoking. We look forward to your unique takes on many of the issues that are raised and haven't disappointed us today. The theme of this conference is constructing the future: authoritarianism and the quest for Oromo sovereignty. So am I to take it that if you had been involved in the drafting, you might have said,
already completed.
I'm just saying, is this an accurate interpretation?
Yeah, you have completed the draft already. So I'm going to take the draft from you and rewrite it.
Very well. Thank you so much.
Okay, one more question.
presentation, Dr. Ayana. My question is that I'll start with a very simple example of an encounter between an Oromo person and a typical Abyssinian, especially like, non-speaking ones. I don't mean to mean anybody. So for example, is there any explanation, like from what everyone should cover, like if somebody sees you, they automatically ask you, are you Habesha? And then they go into assuming that you are an Habesha, and they start a whole conversation before they even know or acknowledge who you are. I mean, there are 80 plus indigenous people in that part of the world. So where does this like inability to see others, ethnic others, or people from different identities and language emanate from? Can you explain it? And then would they be able to understand that your theories would help us understand them? That, if they don't listen to it and understand themselves, yeah. Can you explain this? Yeah, humans always look for their likeness. And so the first Arabs that moved around North Africa, East Africa, sort of said, for instance, on the highlands of Mount Kenya, they said there are white people. White people. When they say white, it's not exactly white like the Arabs. It means something or group of people who are like them to some extent. And so they are trying to find likeness and then to communicate. And that was partly ethnocentric, but partly human. When Europeans came down Egypt and then they started writing, they said, oh, there are Hamitic people. There are Hamitic people in Egypt. The Hamitic people had moved down to East Africa. They spread civilization. And these Hamitic people descended from us. They were born from us. They were born from our ancestors who had settled in what is today the Middle East. Partly human, partly ethnocentric, but still it is there. So the way humans approach other humans is trying to find some common similarity. But then there is the ethnocentric aspect, which presents, I am better than you. I am better than you. You are my lesser version. Hamitic is a lesser version of the whites. And then the whites on top of Mount Kenya, a lesser version of the Arabs. But then this is the human side. Come to Ethiopia. When you have the word Habesha, which scholars now drop it, it means totally different thing. The Habesha are the chosen race. They were descended from Sabians who settled in northern horn of Ethiopia some 10,000 years ago. And you guys, you are not Habesha. That's what they are. And leptophorally, the notion sort of included the Guraka and the other eventually. And then that originally tried to, but then it did not really work very much. So for the kings, the idea of Habesha was to bring a kind of supra-ethnic connecting the Amhara and Tigrayans and to avoid, to bury the contradiction between the two, the Amhara and the Tigrayan. That was why it was used. That's what's used. So to come directly to your question, Eritreans were first amazed about the word Habesha. and they found out that a Tuareg, a Nubian, can look like a Habesha. And then eventually they dropped the war because it doesn't help them. It doesn't really help them. And because it signifies something of the Middle East. And so they really dropped it. So when the word is used in a very, it's either ethnocentric way or to some extent also human way. But when it's used in a human way, it means you are a lesser version of me. Lesser version of me. But with the Ethiopian context, it is not even giving that version, lesser version. You are somebody over whom I have a sovereign freedom. That is what it means.
Good. That concludes our panel. Thank you very much, Professor Daniel Ayana. Tukulani for the next program.
Hello, everyone. We will be going to lunch soon, but before we do that, we have just a couple of brief items. Just first, before we show you a really interesting short video, which I'll just She's the author of a memoir that is outside right now called Of Course Undreamed. And I would love to invite her to the stage just to give a very few comments about her new publication. I'm very nervous. I'm very honored to be here. Hello, everyone. I know how to write in English, but I have a little bit hard time to speak English. So pardon me if I jungle here and there. Thank you, Ms. Jalada. Thank you, Dr. Asada, and thank you, OSA, to give me this chance to introduce myself. Thank you, everyone. As Jalani said, my name is Amani Mohammed Bektara, and my pen name is Amin Mohammed. My name is changed from Amani to Amin when I became the US citizen, so I kept that name Amin. So you can call me Amani, I love it. My mom and dad gave me that name, and you can call me Amin too. So I'm a kind of a writer, not really. I'm not a professor and a doctor, but I'm a woman, Oromo woman, who came to this land by opportunity. So I wrote a memoir or a kind of autobiography. So when I was back home, to make it clear, I came through Delhi. So when I came to this country, I had a big expectation in this land. But all of you know, so when you came to here, the life we expected and the life in here is quite different. So that is my starting point to write this book. Then what we go through as immigrants, the hardship, the working, the language, the culture, everything make us, for me, was miserable. One time in a time, I was thinking to go back to Ethiopia, but I didn't. So this book is about me, and all of you can find yourself in that book because all we immigrants go through those difficulties. Some people go very hardship, some people was okay, but mine is maybe for some people was worse, maybe moderate or low. So as a migrant, all of you professors, doctors, please get my book, read it, and give me feedback. I can write again. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. your reflection actually fits into our next afternoon's panel, and I think it's a very good panel.
Kipling kita belajar. Lafi tahu